Welcome back after the break. You're watching Indus News and I'm Fiza Jamal with our main stories in detail. We start with Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan, who says he will no longer seek dialogue with India. In an interview with the New York Times, Khan said India mistook Pakistan's peace overtures for appeasement, adding there is no point in talking. The Pakistani Prime Minister said India is denying Kashmiris their right to observe religious practices, including the recent Eid al-Adha festival. He drew attention to the abuse and violence suffered by millions of Kashmiris living under Indian occupation. Speaking on the first International Day for Victims of Violence based on religion, Khan said the world must prevent the impending Indian genocide of Kashmiris. Meanwhile, the UN has once again called for talks between Pakistan and India to resolve the crisis sparked by New Delhi's annexation of occupied Kashmir. Secretary General Antonio Guterres said the disputed region is governed by the UN Charter and Security Council resolutions. Moving on to Sudan, where Abdullah Hamdok has been sworn in as new prime minister as the country embarks on a 3-year transition to civilian rule. The economist was appointed by the leader of the newly formed 11-member Sovereign Council, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. The US, Britain and Norway have welcomed Hamdok's appointment, calling it a historic moment for Sudan. Talking to reporters in Khartoum, Hamdok said his priorities are achieving peace and solving Sudan's economic crisis. The new Sovereign Council replaces the military junta that took charge in April after popular protests forced the removal of President Omar al-Bashir. General Burhan will lead the council of 6 civilians and 4 other military officers. The new government will run the country until general elections scheduled for 2022. Five Kurdistan Workers' Party militants have been killed during security operations in southeast Turkey. The Interior Ministry says the operation was carried out to protect Turkish Petroleum Corporation workers. It says 3 terrorists were killed during the operation in Mardin province. 2 others were killed in an air-backed counter-terrorism operation in Sirnak province. Earlier, 3 Turkish soldiers were killed and another wounded in a PKK attack in Silopi. Ankara accuses the PKK of killing some 40,000 people during the insurgency it launched in 1978. NATO says 2 US military personnel have been killed in Afghanistan as peace talks between Washington and Taliban are set to resume in Qatar. The alliance withheld the identity of both service members. 13 US troops have been killed in Afghanistan this year. Around 14,000 US troops are still in the country. Russia's President Vladimir Putin says the US is in a position to deploy a new land-based cruise missile in Romania and Poland. After a meeting with his Finnish counterpart, Sauli Niinisto, Putin said Moscow will respond in an appropriate manner to the move. He said Washington will not inform the European Union of the deployment. The US says it has no plans to deploy new land-based missiles in Europe. On Monday, the US conducted its first ground-launched cruise missile test after pulling out of the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. Russia and China have asked the UN Security Council to meet today to discuss a cruise missile test conducted by the US on Sunday. They have asked UN Disarmament Affairs Chief Izumi Nakamitsuto to brief the 15-member body. Moscow and Beijing say Washington's plans to develop and deploy medium-range missiles are a threat to international peace and security. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Geng Shuang says the US is stoking a new global arms race. He says the US action will lead to a new Cold War and have a negative impact on regional and global security. Earlier, Russia said it will respond to the US cruise missile test. This US test is the first since it pulled out of the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty earlier this month. European leaders say Russia needs to resolve the Ukraine crisis before it can rejoin the G7 nations. This follows US President Donald Trump's call to readmit Russia to the bloc ahead of its summit on Saturday. French President Emmanuel Macron says readmitting Russia without resolving the Ukraine issue will be an error. Germany's Foreign Minister Heiko Maas also called for Russia and Ukraine to revive peace talks before the measure could be considered. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says it was too early to start considering Russia's inclusion.
Given the continuing instability, civil war, the war in Ukraine, given Russia's provocations, not just in Ukraine but in many other places, I must say I am very much with Chancellor Merkel in thinking that the case has yet to be made out for Russia to return to the G7.
Russia was expelled from the G8 after its annexation of Crimea in 2014, a move condemned by the US and other nations. Moving on, the US has passed a new rule allowing officials to detain migrant families together indefinitely. Previously, authorities could hold the illegal migrants' children in detention only for a 20-day limit. US President Donald Trump said the new rule will keep families together. Trump said he is concerned about the increasing number of undocumented children attempting asylum in the US. He also said his administration was seriously looking at ending the right of citizenship for children born to non-citizens within the US. The Mexican Foreign Ministry has expressed concern over the move. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has praised Denmark's cooperation as a US ally. This comes after President Donald Trump canceled his visit to Denmark because it rebuffed his suggestion of buying Greenland. In a phone call to Foreign Minister Jeppe Kofod, Secretary of State Pompeo praised Denmark's contribution to global security. The US State Department says Pompeo and Kofod also discussed strengthening bilateral cooperation in the Arctic. Earlier, Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen regretted Trump's decision to cancel his visit. She said the cancellation will not affect cooperation between the two countries.
Surprise that I received the news that President Trump has cancelled his state visit to Denmark on the 2nd and 3rd September. I had been looking forward to the visit. Our preparations were well underway. It was an opportunity, I think, to celebrate Denmark's close relationship to US.
South Korea says the US and North Korea may soon resume denuclearization talks, but Pyongyang says it has no interest in dialogue as long as Washington and Seoul persist with military provocations. South Korea's Deputy National Security Advisor revealed the resumption of talks after meeting with US envoy Stephen Biegun. But North Korea's foreign ministry says a US cruise missile test and its delivery of 2 F-35 stealth warplanes to South Korea are dangerous. In a statement, Pyongyang said it is committed to resolving all issues through dialogue, but would not accept talks accompanied by military threats. Denuclearization talks have stalled since the failed Hanoi summit between North Korea's chairman Kim Jong-un and US President Donald Trump in February. In Indonesia, over 1,000 security personnel have been sent to the restive eastern province of West Papua. Riots started when Papuan students were detained after allegedly disrespecting the Indonesian flag on the country's Independence Day. An insurgency against Jakarta's rule has simmered for decades, accusing security forces of rights abuses against Papua's ethnic Melanesian population. Following the students' arrest, the region has seen street battles between police and demonstrators who torched buildings. Riot police fired warning shots at the protesters who pelted shops and homes with rocks. Protesters have also set a market on fire and destroyed ATM machines. Police have arrested 45 people, including some they accuse of masterminding the protests. Nigeria has marked 3 years free of endemic wild polio. Health officials say the progress can help declare Africa polio-free early next year. For details, watch this report.
Polio is a highly infectious disease, mainly affecting children under the age of 5. Africa's last case of wild polio was recorded in Nigeria 3 years ago.
Today, the 21st day of August 2019, Nigeria makes history, having achieved 3 years without a case of white polio virus WPV. The last white polio virus case was isolated in a child in Borno State on the 21st of August 2016.
Health officials are keen to sustain the historic gains.
We must remember that the battle is not over yet. We have to maintain our efforts and intensify them to make sure the historic gains are sustained and that polio-free certification is obtained for Nigeria in due time next year.
Since Nigeria's last case, the government launched many extra vaccination campaigns and improved surveillance and routine immunization. To begin the process of certifying the continent polio-free, a team of independent scientists will examine data from all 47 countries.
Singapore is looking to revolutionize its public transport system. It will begin trials for driverless buses next week, which commuters can book using an app. The government is looking to roll out automated shuttles across the city-state within a few years. More in this report. Working with a foreign company, Singapore has turned itself into a test bed for self-driving vehicles. It's set to begin a trial with ST Engineering, which will test 4 driverless minibuses on the resort island of Sentosa.
The autonomous bus that we have built up using our own engine capability in Singapore comprises of a suite of sensors like the laser, the radar, and we fuse the information together, and that allowed the autonomous bus to know where it was, where is it going.
Those without smartphones can book shuttles using kiosks along their route. The buses will also have a driver on standby in case any problems arise.
He or she doesn't touch the steering wheel. Only when there is an emergency or when there is a need, unforeseen circumstances, that he will take over the vehicle. But based on our testing so far, we have good confidence that the bus will be able to operate autonomously under normal circumstances.
If the trial is successful, the model will be applied to the whole city-state. It's time for us to take a very short break. Don't go anywhere, because coming up after the break, humanoid robot will spend 10 days on the International Space Station. And Brazilian slackliners have taken the sport to new heights. Welcome back after the break. You're watching Indus News and I'm Fiza Jamal with our main stories in detail. The World Health Organization says microplastics contained in drinking water pose a low risk to human health at current levels. The UN agency says more research is needed to reassure consumers.
Studies in recent years on plastic particles detected in tap and bottled water have sparked public concern, but the World Health Organization says the limited data appears reassuring in its first report on the potential health risks associated with ingestion. The current and available studies on the toxicity of plastic parts are limited. Microplastics pose 3 threats: physical, chemical, and the third is about bacterial colonization.
Well, after having reviewed all the data, I think our message is one of reassurance to potentially worried consumers, and that the health risks that were assessed to be low, given what we've seen. But we also believe that a lot more research needs to be done.
The World Health Organization's report says despite the flaws with worst-case scenarios, it is confident that the risks remain low should some data change. Microbial pathogens include human and livestock waste entering water sources that cause deadly diarrheal disease in countries lacking water systems. Some 2 billion people drink feces-contaminated water, causing nearly 1 million deaths annually. The World Health Organization's coordinator for water and sanitation says the focus of regulators around the world should be on this.
I think for consumers, I think, drink your tap water if you have a good supply, a nicely regulated supply, enjoy it. Don't be worried about bottled water either. If you're a regulator, we're not recommending that you set standards and call for routine monitoring. And if you're a water supplier, please focus on known risks.
A WWF study says the largest source of plastic ingestion is drinking water, but shellfish are another major source.
And Russia has launched an unmanned rocket carrying a life-size humanoid robot that will spend 10 days on the International Space Station. The Fedor with identification number Skybot F-85 is the first ever robot sent to space by Russia. Fedor took off in a Soyuz rocket today from Russia's Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. The silvery anthropomorphic robot stands 1 meter 80 centimeters tall and weighs 160 kilograms. Fedor copies human movements, a key skill that allows it to remotely help astronauts carry out tasks while they are strapped into an exoskeleton. It will dock with the space station on Saturday and stay there till September the 7th. No humans are traveling in the Soyuz spacecraft in order to test a new emergency rescue system.
Use MS-14 spacecraft on a flight to pave the way for future crew launches to the International Space Station.
Brazilian slackliners have taken the sport to new heights. Thrill seekers balance and walk mid-air on lines tied between abandoned buildings in Sao Paulo. How they do it? Watch in this report.
Slacklining is a sport involving walking on a strap suspended in the air tied between two anchors. It's normally practiced just shy of a few meters off the ground in local parks. Enthusiasts in Sao Paulo have kicked it up a notch. Slackliner aficionados say that the sport gives them peace and balance in their lives.
I slackline because it gives me peace, equilibrium in my life. I did not have equilibrium in my body. I taught myself patience, focus, concentration to not give up. I might fall a number of times, but I'll get back up and cross the other side.
Slacklining groups have become popular in Sao Paulo, providing Paulistas with some respite from their day-to-day jobs. Some long abandoned and partly constructed buildings in the city's outskirts have become their favorite haunt.
It's great because those on the street think that this building is abandoned, but it's not. They look up and see that there are people practicing this sport. Many people look up in admiration. They're providing joy for this abandoned space.
Afterwards, life goes back to normal in the teeming megalopolis.
Virtual reality is becoming a major part of the music experience. A university graduate in London has created a way to mix music using VR technology. This report has the details.
Virtual reality has certainly passed the hype stage since YouTube and Facebook enabled posting 360-degree videos. But the technology is yet to become popular in producing music. Now, a graduate from London's Royal College of Art, Alex Kane, has created a music mixing tool called Volta, having the potential to go mainstream.
You put yourself inside the mixing desk and but in this case, the mixing desk, the priority of the mixing desk is to make music not just on the left and the right, but to use the entire soundscape.
Volta allows people to see music tracks and control them with their bodies just by putting on a pair of VR goggles. Using VR controllers, the user can move the spheres, changing the perceived orientation of the sound. They can also raise and lower the volume of tracks, record and play back their movement around the user.
And now with more immersive technologies like virtual reality and augmented reality, things that have head tracking, and computers that can handle processing, rendering audio in real time, rendering changes to audio in real time, it's now becoming a viable way to consume and just listen to music.
The tool was Kane's thesis project, which he has been working on for just over a year. Volta is still in development and is being piloted with music artists. Kane foresees it being available to the public in a year's time, when he also expects it to work on augmented reality glasses.
Let's take you to the world of business, where Asian stock markets are flat as investors await further clarity on interest rate cuts from the U.S. Federal Reserve. Overnight gains in New York were overshadowed by news that manufacturing activity in Japan slipped for a fourth consecutive month in August. Exports fell at a sharper pace, reversing early gains on the Nikkei 225. Hong Kong's Hang Seng's index dipped nearly 1% as nervous investors sought more clarity on the U.S. central bank's stimulus plans. The Shanghai Composite is also down about 0.5%. The Kospi index is down a fraction after South Korea's central bank warned that Japanese export curbs could have a bigger than expected impact. Well, the sun is out in Lahore with no chances of rain, but let's see what the weather is looking like today around the globe. These are all the main stories in detail I have for you this hour, but stay tuned to Indus News for further updates.